James, I think I'm one of the few people in the country today that feels a bit sorry for Rishi Sunak because, in all honesty, he inherited the bogey Rwanda plan. Also, I think he was rather hawkish against lockdown, but he's kind of inherited the bogeys from lockdowns as well. I mean, poor Rishi, can he ever catch a break?
Well, quite. I think that's he will be certainly thinking privately today, but outwardly, obviously, he has to go on and give this appearance of competence and in dealing with these issues. Look, I think, Alex, this morning he, at the COVID inquiry, gave a rather assured performance. If you look at his body language, how he was sounding, he was all very confident across the details. So I think he'll be pleased with how that's gone. But you're right. After 13 years in government, the point is that there's this problem of loyalty and diminishing returns of it. As you get towards the end of a parliament, your troops are less likely to follow you into battle. They're less be in line. There's also big things about coalition, the Tory coalition in 2019 splitting after all the ups and downs of the past 4 or 5 years. And even on an issue like migration, where he's going further than any prime minister before him, it's clearly not enough for some. And I think now we've seen this afternoon, we've seen a belated perhaps pushback from the government against some of the right-wing groups, pointing out that, we have to have some bit of appeal for exceptional circumstances. In case you've got, for instance, a pregnant woman, asylum seeker, someone with a very rare medical condition, which would only affect a minority, I believe about 0.5% of cases. But even that is considered enough for some members of the party. So I think it is a very difficult one. I think that said, of course, I wouldn't want to absolve him of his responsibility in terms of making some of those issues worse. And perhaps there's a debate around, if he knew that he couldn't stop the boats in their entirety, why did he put it on a podium at the beginning of the year?
Exactly. James, I think there are 5 groups opposing or raising objections to the Rwanda scheme B. Where do you think we're heading with this? Marc Francois indicating that his group, they're certainly urging the Prime Minister to shelve this Rwanda safety bill and to come back with something else. That's an indication that if the Prime Minister doesn't, they'll vote against it. So I guess my questions to you are, where are we heading with this? Will he get away with it tomorrow night in Parliament, Tuesday night? And after that, I assume the bill will, if it does pass, will go up to the House of Lords, where it will be caught up basically forever. So this is a road to nowhere, isn't it?
Well, I certainly think that the House of Lords are probably going to block it. But let's deal with the Commons first of all. No government has lost on a second reading of a bill since 1986. Margaret Thatcher's Shops Act, Sunday trading. Therefore, I think what is most likely, perhaps, is that some of these Tory MPs on the right don't vote for it, but they will abstain. And of course, the abstentions mean that rather than having 2 votes against you, you only have 1, which means that you only need 57 abstentions. That's a much higher figure than the 29 needed to overturn this bill. So I think that a lot of the MPs on the Tory right will abstain from the bill tomorrow, and hope that they'll amend it further down the line. And that's when they can toughen it up. And I think, frankly, you've got an exhausted parliamentary party coming to the end of a busy parliamentary term. And therefore, I think they want to make it through to Christmas and then hopefully pick up where they left off in January.
Going back to the COVID inquiry, Rishi Sunak has just been giving his point of view, saying his primary concern was protecting millions of jobs, particularly vulnerable people who worked in this industry, the hospitality sector. All the data, all the evidence, all the polling, all the input from those companies suggested that unless we did something, many of those jobs would have been at risk with devastating consequences for those people and their families. That's why independent think tanks had recommended doing something like that, i.e., Eat Out to help out, grappling with the same issue of how to ensure that those jobs, and essentially that was the primary driver of what he was doing. He's the first one, really. I mean, he is being cross-examined over this, very much regarded as his scheme. He seems to be the first one who's been in the dock, let's call it, almost defending the fact that going full throttle on lockdown wasn't the right approach, and he at least had an eye on the economic future of the country.
Well, quite. And I think that was partly his brief, as the person in charge of HM Treasury, looking at the finances, looking not just at the short term, but the long term as well. And I think what was clear from this was that, as he put it this morning, most of the departments were counting on the Department for Health to give them their information. And that obviously influenced the kind of metrics by which you're assessing it, if you're in terms of the virus rather than the economic impact. But I do think that Rishi Sunak has probably given one of the more impressive testimonies today. And that's because he clearly thought about it a lot. He was contrite in retrospect. He said, although he was a little bit doubtful about about the pros and cons and about lockdowns, he said, for instance, I'm sorry we didn't do more. And I think that will go some way to appeasing those on the fence. I mean, there aren't many of those in the country, but trying to ensure that he was trying to do the right thing. And of course, at the time, a lot of the February, March 2020 calculations about this virus turned out to be inaccurate. There was a lot of doubt in the scientific community about it all. And so I think that he has got through this morning as well as hope. And also he can just point out that he was trying to think about long-term things. And it comes on a day when Centre for Social Justice released a big report talking about how kids are going to be impacted from lockdown. 1 in 5 children more now have mental health problems as a result of it. So I think that it probably will enable Rishi Sunak to emerge from the COVID inquiry with his reputation reasonably intact.
Quick last question, James. Pessimists in the Tory party are predicting that they may, at the next election, end up with as few as 130 seats, which will be their lowest number ever. It looks to me as if that's the direction Rishi is heading. What's your estimation?
I think it's been a pretty tough time for the Prime Minister. What I would only say against that is that there has been a modest Tory recovery in the polls over the past week or so in terms of those polls being published. But look, I mean, the key thing is how the Tory party chooses to respond to various setbacks. Divided parties don't win elections. And so I think that the challenge that the party managers will be throwing down to the side is, look, guys, we can either come out of this with 130 MPs or 200 MPs, or, some of the more optimists would even hope they'd win it. But unless they get their act together pretty sharpish, it's going to look like a ragtag bunch against a pretty disciplined Labour side.
Thank you ever so much.